So the last video was a little more negative than I meant for it to be. So to start off this video, I wanted to mention a few pros of this book. Some of the pros being the use of stats, especially when talking about World Cups, analyzing the age of players, the amount of players playing in the top 5 leagues, and other interesting stats. Also a nice summary of the US World Cup history from 1990 onwards, in which he offers insight and interesting tidbits of information of things behind the scenes, so to speak, in those camps and squads. However, some of the cons affect the pros here. For example, his summary of the World Cups is mired by the fact that he is seeing them through the lens of his Spirit of 76 ideology, highlighting details about the US tactics and style that fit in with his narrative while ignoring those that do not. Which begs the question, if the US really did have the identity he claims, or is he simply retroactively applying it to them? Is he twisting his theory to suit the facts, or twisting facts to suit his theory? Now, of course, it certainly can't be denied that the USMNT did play defensive counterattacking football at that time. But again, did they always play that way? Is he only focusing on that part of USMNT history because it fits with his narrative? Did he start writing this book already with certain preconceived notions? Well, these are questions only Steven can answer. Steven uses these terms frequently in his book, and I always found myself scratching my head when he did, because what do they even mean? He mentions how some American fans supposedly wanted the national team to play more European, but again, I have no idea what that even means. Even if I heard a USMNT fan saying something that vague and frankly stupid, I would be just as confused and would ask that he clarify himself. The problem here is that Steven never does. The only thing he does say is this. What we mean when we use the term European style, we are referring to a style that is distinct from a traditionally American counterattacking style and reliance on grit, goalkeeping, defense, and set pieces. So basically, European, I guess, means anything not American. Well, this is definitely circular logic and falls apart when you unpack it. Now, Steven's definition of European style is so incredibly vague, it's essentially useless. But what about American style? Well, according to Steven, that is counterattack, a reliance on grit, goalkeeping, defense, and set pieces. First off, I love how he just says defense, like he can't even be more specific than that. Sounds like something Ted Lasso would say. What is your unique style, sir? Our style is to attack and defend. Okay, how are you going to defend? The defense is going to defend by defending the goal. Jokes aside, literally every single team that is focusing on counterattack is going to inherently rely on strong, compact defending and good goalkeeping. Now, that means keeping their defensive shape, having their defenders react well, making the right tackles at the right times, and most importantly, clearing the ball properly. And on top of that, they will need to have a very good shot stopping goalkeeper who can come up with the big saves when the defenders inevitably make mistakes and allow a shot on goal, which definitely happens quite a bit. Why? Because they are sitting back and inviting pressure. And they will also inevitably need to rely on set pieces because they will only get a few chances to attack on the counter anyway. So they will either need to have world-class finishers who can put away the few chances they get, or rely on set pieces. And since most teams don't have world-class finishers, they all rely perfecting set pieces. So it's ridiculous to suggest that the US used a counterattacking style that is somehow unique because, as Steven puts it, it just relies on goalkeeping, defense, and set pieces. That is literally part of the system, and all the teams who use it will need all of those same things because, again, they are inherent to that system. Now, Americans did not invent this style, nor did they even combine certain elements in a unique way to create something different. So calling this the American style is not only factually wrong, but just plain insulting to every single team that has ever played that way long before the USMNT ever did, which is a lot. This style is literally one of the most basic ways of playing the game. It's simple and easy to implement, which is probably why it's so common and probably why the USMNT started playing that way in the first place. Not because it's our natural style, that's nonsense. There is no such thing as an American style. Only styles that the USMNT has used in a certain time period. Now in the 1990s and early 2000s, that was defensive counterattacking football. Great. Currently, it's a possession-based pressing system. Fine. In the early 1900s, it was something. I honestly don't know what tactics and system the USMNT used at that time, but I can guarantee that it wasn't the same. And the same can be said about every national team. They all have changed systems and tactics throughout their respective histories. It's simply the way things work. And by that same token, there is no such thing as a European style either. First off, that term is so vague, it's borderline nonsensical, something that Stephen himself acknowledges. Using the term European style is always difficult. Exchange the word difficult for stupid, it's more accurate. Because European soccer encompasses many countries and styles, and even within those countries, there are different styles. And Stephen does this a lot. He will make an argument, then point out the flaws in his own argument, and then just leave it there. He won't make any counter arguments to those flaws he just pointed out. And sorry, Stephen, you don't get points for that. Mentioning your argument has flaws does not equate to fixing those flaws. And even if you try being more specific, like instead of saying European style, you say English style or French style. Sorry, but you'd still be wrong. There are 50 countries in Europe. You think they all have their own unique styles and ways of playing the game? They don't. There are also 211 national teams in the world. You think they each have their own styles? Again, they don't. These are just terms used by armchair pundits and journalists who lack the tactical knowledge to be more specific. So, as stated, clubs and national teams change tactics and styles all the time. And more often than not, it's caused by a change in manager. For example, Chile hired Marcelo Bielsa, who has a very distinct soccer philosophy and style. His tenure began in 2007, and there were some growing pains early on, which is to be expected when adopting a new style of play. But as time goes on, the team becomes more familiar with it and starts playing better. Which is why, with his style, Chile were able to make great strides, culminating in qualifying for the 2010 World Cup after missing out on the past two tournaments. They were eliminated in the round of 16, but it was still considered a huge achievement by the Chilean fans and media. And again, it happened thanks to them adopting a whole new style of play from their manager. If they had been reluctant to change out of some misplaced sense of national identity, then it would not have happened. So the USMNT changing styles along with their manager makes total sense. Berhalter showed with his Columbus Crew team what style he likes his teams to use: an emphasis on positional structure and organization, clear roles for each player, maintaining possession with accurate passing and playing out from the back, and of course, effective use of the press. And based on recent friendlies, it seems Berhalter wants the US to be a counter-pressing team, utilizing a high press specifically in the midfield to win the ball back in dangerous positions to launch a quick attack before the opposition can get back into its defensive shape. Now, there is nothing wrong with this system other than it being completely different than the defensive counter-attacking one Steven seems to fetishize over. While there are still some obvious kinks Berhalter still needs to work out, I think it's just a matter of small tweaks and the right player selection for this system. But one thing Steven does point out that I absolutely agree with is creating familiarity with this style for the players and building team chemistry. This is something that the USMNT needs to work on. The problem is that they haven't had nearly enough time to do this, and US soccer will have to share some of the blame here. They needed to have scheduled more friendlies and games so the team can work on these things, not just for the starters, but for the whole squad. And that most definitely includes the backups. For example, the USMNT has only had 26 games in over 2 years. Yes, you can blame COVID for last year, but still. And it is important to note that any change in system is going to have to go through some growing pains. Chile, mentioned before, did so, and so did Spain with Tiki Taka. They started with it in 2006, but weren't successful until 2008. Stephen is hung up on the specific style and believes it shouldn't be changed, but the truth is, it can be changed, no problem. But it is important that time be given to build familiarity with that style and to figure out the best players that fit the system quickly, so they can play more together and build good team chemistry, which is what the USMNT is currently working on. Hopefully, Nations League and the subsequent Gold Cup is enough to do so before World Cup qualifiers. Another thing I will say that I agree with Steven is his focus on mentality. Now, while he goes a bit too far with believing that an underdog mentality specifically is needed, but the idea that we need to have our players show grit, determination, and a no quit attitude is correct. We saw this past friendly against Switzerland. That mentality and attitude is lacking. So I do think this is something Berhalter needs to work on. And we as fans should be more demanding of these players. They need to show that fight and desire to win, especially when we concede first. For this last part, I'm going to talk about what Steven says about the United States women's national team, because I disagree with him completely. And I think most fans of the women's team will too. As mentioned before, Steven is obsessed with this underdog mentality that he believes is part of not just the USMNT's identity, but even the women's team too. Now, I'm sorry, but that's just ridiculous. There is not a single women's team fan who would consider them underdogs. They have won 4 World Cups out of 8 and have never finished outside the top 3 in a single World Cup, ever, and have finished in the top 2 in every Olympics except one, also winning gold in 4 of them. How can anyone call this team underdogs with a straight face? It's laughably ridiculous. So how does Steven do it? Well, by playing fast and loose with the term underdog. He claims that the USWNT can be considered underdogs because of their ongoing legal fight with US Soccer about equal pay.
Those eggs were a lie, Steven. A lie!
First off, nobody, and I mean nobody, except Steven Mandis, uses the term underdog in this way. Everyone uses that term in a sporting context, and never with how much money individual players make. You know what's even more crazy? Is that the female players themselves don't even think this way. Listen to a clip from an interview where Steven talks about this.
When we interviewed them, they said, "Oh, we're not underdogs." I was like, "Really?" Because I was like, "Tell me who your biggest rival is." And they were sort of confused by that, because they were like, "Well, I don't know, maybe it's Norway or Sweden or something." And I was like, "No, it's not. It's the soccer federation and the establishment."
Yes, you heard that right. He literally spoke to members of the team, and they themselves specifically said that they did not view themselves as underdogs, and he literally tried to force that mentality onto them. A team that naturally and organically created a winning mentality with confidence and dominance needs to now change that and forcefully adopt an underdog mentality. Why? Because Steven Mandis says so. If your jaw hasn't dropped to the floor here, I don't know what to tell you. This is just absolutely ridiculous, but this is how much of an obsession, no, downright fetish, Steven has with this underdog mentality. So as you can probably tell by now, there were some serious flaws in Steven's thesis about the USMNT's identity and style of play. To summarize, here are the things I liked about the book, along with the things that I didn't, which were just discussed in these 2 videos. Things I liked: the use of stats, the summary of the USMNT World Cup history, good info about the players and coaches of the USMNT from that time period, an importance of the economic incentives to promote youth identification and development, specifically with transfer fees and solidarity payments that will help eliminate the need for pay to play, the need to allow youth academies to recruit nationally after a certain age, the need to eliminate the salary cap in MLS in order for the league to grow, and lowering the cost of coaching licenses in the US and improving the quality of coaching, and much more. And to recap some of the things I didn't like, again, that the USMNT has a uniquely American style of play, that defensive counterattacking football is the only way the USMNT should play, the need for an underdog mentality in both the USMNT and the women's team, and that a European style exists and should be avoided somehow, and his whole idea about the spirit of 76. Again, I recommend everyone to check out the book for themselves, and if you have already, let me know what you thought about it. Do you agree with his ideas or not? Which ones and which ones you don't, and why? Don't forget to hit that like button, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for watching. This is American Soccer United, the place where American soccer fans unite.